Hi, thanks for joining me. I want to talk in this video about how to read James Cone. Now, this is a follow-up to my previous video wherein I discussed a couple points from James Cone's theology and tried to just give you a brief introduction to a couple of the distinct ideas that make him unique as a theologian. But the point of that video and the point of all these 5-minute videos really is to encourage you and try to dispel a few of the ideas about these theologians so that you can have the courage to then go and read them for yourself and ultimately to see that it's not impossible for you to do that. So the goal here, I'm going to talk about a couple of the books Cone has written, as well as a few of the secondary literature on him. I think James Cone is extremely important, especially as an American theologian. As I said in the previous video, I think he's one of the most significant, if not the most significant American theologians of at least recent history, if not of all time. So, with that said, let's get into it. The book I consider to be his best, James Cone, is God of the Oppressed. It's certainly his most systematic and his most thorough. So if you want just a one-stop, really good, but still quite dense book into James Cone, I would definitely highly recommend it, God of the Oppressed. Very good work. Really the core of his thought can be found in that book, so it's definitely a recommended one. For a more lighter approach to his work, The Cross and the Lynching Tree is an amazing text. Really, it stands out as just being a beautiful book, a moving book, a very important book. He compares the cross to the lynching tree in the American South, and just it's a really profound book. So highly recommend this. It's a bit more on a approachable level. So if you're looking for something just easy to get started with, this will be a great one for that. Of course, you would recommend his A Black Theology of Liberation, which is his classic text. It's very good. I prefer God of the Oppressed for a bit more of a systematic approach, but this is also an excellent text. It's a little bit earlier of his works, but also very, very good. So very highly recommend that. For some of his earliest essays, this collection, Risks of Faith, is quite good. So you can read one of his first essays on Black theology and Black power, which is really good. So highly recommend that. I have another video in my channel where I actually read that essay, his first public essay. That's quite great. So that one's very good. A couple biographical texts are always good. It's always good to know more of the context of somebody's theology, and so both of these are great. This was published after Cone actually died, but he still wrote it. It just came out after he passed. But this is a really good kind of look back at his life and his career, and this is an earlier autobiographical text as well. So both of these are good to dive in for a biography. I think if I choose one, this one's maybe a little bit better because it's later and it's got a little bit more of that retrospective maturity to it. For My People is a surprisingly good book. The title itself sounds like it would just be purely about the church, but there's a lot of really great stuff packed in here, so I do recommend this one. And then of course Cone's first book is great, so you can't go wrong with it. There's a certain radical nature to it that is just appealing to me. It's just raw and honest, and it's really great. So it's called Black Theology and Black Power. Obviously it came out of kind of the Black Power movement, and was somewhat of a response to it. So it's a really good book. Definitely recommend, but it is a little bit more rough around the edges book. As far as secondary literature is concerned, unfortunately there's not a tremendous amount about Cone, which I hope will change, but there are a couple good ones. So Black Faith and Public Talk is a good book. Cone actually does have an essay in here as well, which is great. But just a solid book. A lot of contributors that are great voices that talk about Cone in here. The Cambridge Companion to Black Theology. These companions are always pretty solid and pretty great, and this one does a good job at diving into some of Cone's work. Obviously, because Cone was the founder of Black Liberation Theology, he is kind of a central figure, but it does discuss some of the other figures and some of the other components to the theology that is helpful. On a specifically Cone book, this was a great study of James Cone. It was actually one of the most helpful ones that from what I had read in researching about James Cone. So it's called Black Theology and Ideology. Really helpful. A lot of good stuff in here, so definitely recommend that. Now, a couple texts that are a little bit not directly related to Cone, but still worth reading. So Stokely Carmichael and Charles V. Hamilton, Black Power. Challenging book. Super important, especially for understanding Cone's work. And then the New Jim Crow is just... now it's a staple, it's a classic, but I think if you've not read this book, you really should. It'll help you understand a bit more of the context of Cohn's work. It's just an excellent study, really, really excellent study. And then finally, of course, I do recommend my own book. Can't go wrong with recommending my own. I kind of approach Cohn from a very humble point of view. At least I tried to, and I really hope that comes off clearly. As a white man, as a white theologian, black theology is challenging to me. It confronts me. It's directed not necessarily for me, but actually against me and my status as being a white person. And so I grapple with some of those questions. So if you're another white person and you're like, well, what does Cohn mean to me? This is a good book, I think, for that. I mean, singing my own praises, but I can't help but be happy with what I did. So it's a good book. I think from that particular point of view, it can be helpful. I do try to be as objective as I can, but as we talked about in Cohn's work, there's no such thing as a purely objective theology. Everything is contextual, so I can't help but speak out of my own experiences. And so I hope my wrestling with Cohn helps people, but ultimately the goal of the book is really to understand Cohn on his own terms. And to explain his theology as clearly as I can. And in plain English is just, it's an apt title. I really try to put it into plain language. So hopefully that book's helpful for you. If you like my 5-minute video, you might like that as well. But like I said, Cohn's work as a whole is fairly approachable. There is the academic side to it. But the one word of caution I'd say is sometimes he can be misunderstood just because if you don't understand some of the theological background to his work, there's certain statements he can make that will sound heretical or too radical, but actually behind them is a strong biblical basis. He is deeply rooted in the scripture, especially some of the old Hebraic prophets. So understanding that background is super important for understanding Cohn. Especially for not misunderstanding him. In my book, I talk about some of try to correct some of the misunderstandings. In my previous video, I tried to talk about one, about the common claim that he's reverse racist or whatever else. But I think Cohn is extremely important for the world today. Within theological circles, and within the church, the critical race theory has been a big point of interest for a lot of people, and I think Cohn, his voice is essential for that conversation, and so we have to be able to listen to his voice and study him with an open mind and all of that. So with that said, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any comments. I will add all of these books to the description so that you can look for them yourself, as well as a few others. But besides that, hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.